So I just want to talk a little bit today in the next 25 minutes about 4 prerequisites I think we have to have if we want to continue this momentum around improvement. And I struggled with all the things to talk about. What could I talk about? And so many of you could actually come speak here just as much as I could because of the leadership and the things you've done. But I honed it into 4 things. Now, these aren't the only 4 things, but 4 things that are really critical so we can have this mindset of continuous improvement. In the theory of constraints world, which is a lot of what we use, the foundation of a lot of our work, they use this idea called POOGI, process of ongoing improvement. And so much of what we do is based off of this work. So let me just start with this first thing. Sometimes we think process improvement or operational excellence may not apply to us, right? That somehow we're different. There's a quote here. Now, here's the deal, guys. I am blind, and I hate PowerPoints, okay? So if I am speaking to a PowerPoint that doesn't exist, just roll with me and pretend that it does and just envision it in your head. So this is a great quote by Margaret Mead, and it says, "You are unique like everyone else," right? In the TOC world, theory of constraints world, we often say, you're very special but not unique. All of us, I don't care if we're serving people or vulnerable populations, we have operations. And operations is simply the way we translate a goal or vision into reality. It's bringing together all the processes, practices, interventions, activities to have a common flow. Governor, you messed up my brow. I'm just saying. I'm just sure. Will you guys work with me on this? So we are, let me just find it. We're all applicable to this. So I have this funny little checklist, and it's pretty obvious about the stuff, the questions you'd ask. But the questions are these. If any of these should apply to you, you need to be aware and conscientious of operational excellence. So one, would anyone care if your program just disappeared? It applies to you. Do you have processes that need to be improved? Well, that's pretty obvious. I think we would all say that we have processes that need to be improved. I can't read this next one. What does it say? Read it as a group. Stakeholders. Oh, it's a ST. It's abbreviated braille. Do stakeholders care? Do you have oversight, people that care? Do customers have expectations what good actually looks like and what they actually want out of your services? Do you actually spend money? I think we all do. We all spend money, right? So we should care about that. Do we produce a service or a product for anyone? Do we build roads? Do we serve, create Meals on Wheels for people? Do we provide any of that stuff? Do we have a goal that we're trying to achieve? You've got a book here called The Goal. I know that Rami's going to talk more today about the goal and how critical that is in all of our organizations. Do you have interdependencies, which we all do for sure? Yeah, I think we would. Do we manage technology? The list goes on, and you can see the last few questions. Do you feel like you're always playing whack-a-mole? I think we all do, right? You're always just chasing everything that looks good. It's hard to do. If any of those things apply to you, you should be concerned about operational excellence. And all that we're doing in the success framework applies to you. Now, all of you should have a brochure at your table. It says success. And it just outlines in one brochure what we're talking about when we mean success. And we'll have a breakout session on that. If you're still in doubt, though, and you still wonder, well, maybe I'm kind of different, right? Like, what do I do? What do I do if I'm serving vulnerable populations? That's not like a process of business permitting. Does that apply to me? We have folks today in their breakout session from the Department of Corrections, and my mantra is if you can do it in the prison system, you can do it anywhere, right? And they've done an amazing job. So part of what we've learned in the theory of constraints, and I'll give you some background. Dr. Goldratt was the founder of theory of constraints. He was a scientist, a physicist by training, and just a brilliant man, and was really about applying the scientific method to what we do in our daily lives, to have clear thinking and logical thinking and understand focus and root cause. And one thing they teach is about classification. So you're going to see this funny picture up here about all these animals, and you wonder, why are we looking at this? Well, if you go to the animal kingdom, there's just millions of animals out there, and insects and birds. And you would think every one of those is unique and different. But what scientists have done is said, wait, we're going to classify these because some of these things have things in common. We don't have to, every time, you guys can go to the next slides, every time we encounter a mammal, have to recreate what a mammal is. We know there's some basic fundamental characteristic traits about mammals, the true for birds and the same for fish. And arthropods and insects and all those different kind of classifications. There's some basic fundamentals that are common among those groupings that help us accelerate our learning and understand the core traits and the DNA that's driving some of their behaviors. This isn't uncommon in the world of government. when we started to catalog all of the services and programs that we do out there, quite frankly, it felt overwhelming. But then we started to get into the work with all of you guys, and we started to see, wait, there's a lot of systems that have stuff in common. We don't have to recreate the wheel. We know what some of the root cause challenges are in some of these systems. And even though they have a different feel or they may have a different twist, there's some basic truths to some of these and basic rules we have to pay attention to. So we've created in the success framework basically 8 kind of work environments. And these work environments are really representative of all the work we do in government. We help people, right? Social service environments. We have project management environments. We have policy shops that just do policy. We have regulatory environments. Resource management, right? Like managing forests or fleet or roads. We have environments that are very transactional or production-based. We have marketing and outreach environments. And we have inventory distribution environments. And we have very common rules and challenges in those environments. So if you fall into one of those, which is most that we do in government, there's solutions and there's big leverage points and big opportunities to make huge changes and improvements in our systems by following some basic rules and principles. In some of the breakout sessions today, you'll hear about some of those, and you'll continue to hear about those in the year ahead. So part of all of this, too, and the one thing I love about the theory of constraints is this idea of simplicity, right? We're not looking about chasing every idea. We're about looking at chasing the ones that are going to give us the biggest leverage point, right? The biggest return for the least amount of effort. We don't want to just chase paper clips. We want to actually make big changes, okay? So that's the basic thing. So, first prerequisite, does it apply to me? The answer is, yeah, absolutely. So second one, actually the next 2, I want to talk about measures. And I'm sometimes very hesitant to talk about measures because it's the first thing we sometimes go to in government. We create like fancy dashboards of all of our measures, and we buy like software to put them on our websites, and we have reams and reams of data. In fact, sometimes I think we have way too much, and it gives us the wrong signals about what's happening. But in the TSC world, again, it's about simplicity, getting the very basics. Now, the analogy I use about measures is it's like buying a fancy new scale, really fancy and looking at your scale every day, but if you don't have the diet and exercise program to go along with it, it doesn't really matter. So the scale is important, but it's only half of the equation, and the rest of the day you're going to hear about the diet and exercise program. But I am going to talk about the scale because it is important. One of the quotes we use often in the TSC world is, "Tell me how you measure me, and I'll tell you how I behave." Getting the measures right can make all the difference, and if we get them wrong, it can actually be very destructive to our organizations and waste resources. So we want very simple measures that can tell powerful stories. Well, prerequisite to all of even creating the measures, which I'll talk about in a second, is really understanding the difference between activity and results, between strategy and outcome, and getting a clear delineation in our mind between just having a lot of stuff going on and getting results. And I know this is common sense. Common sense isn't always common practice because it's hard, especially in government. What is our outcome? What do we mean by quality? And I'll talk about that in a second. So I told the governor coming in I'm going to use a football analogy. And do you guys think that I play football or not? I don't play football, okay? I don't know a lot about football. I know enough to be dangerous, but I find it an interesting sport. I find it interesting because they have a very clear goal, right? What is their goal? To win, right? They want to win. Very clear goal. They want to win. And how do they know if they're winning? Men in the room and women who like football. They get more touchdowns than other people, or points. I started to call them penalty shots, and I was corrected. They're not penalty shots, they're field goals. So, right? They get more points. And so just for the point of today, I'm going to use touchdowns. They get more touchdowns. Very clear, easy goal. It's essentially their goal unit. You'll hear us sometimes use this term goal unit. And goal unit essentially says, hey, if I have a goal, what's the unit of measurement I'm going to use to know if I'm winning or not? Football teams are really good in that they track a lot of statistics. And then getting ready for this talk, I was overwhelmed by the number of statistics they track, right? Yards attempted versus yards completed, and yards gained on a completed pass, and yards gained from a running back, and it goes on and on. It's overwhelming. But with all of the stuff they track every day, They have still one goal in mind and to win. And they do not confuse new plays and new practice schedules and new routines or even new stadiums or new uniforms with their goal unit. All of that is to get their goal unit more points and to stop the other team from getting points. Super clear. So they have a yardstick, right? They can go up against this yardstick and say, with all of the work we're doing, all the activity, the interventions, the changes, are we getting better or not? Are we making more touchdowns or not? Is it scoring more points, making more points, something with points? Are they getting that or not? Super simple. It's that clear. Now, do they have to look at the day-to-day stuff and the day-to-day stats? When we manage our business, do we have to look at day-to-day backlogs and demand, and are we meeting it, and are we having timeliness, and do we have phone wait calls, and what are our staffing caseloads look like? Absolutely. But it's not enough. We have to know if we're getting our goal units. It's just critical. So what do we do in government sometimes? Well, we can get distracted and lost in all the busyness and forget our goal units. So we create, big technology initiatives, or we have big automation projects, or we have, new big one-stop initiatives, and we decentralize and we centralize, and we just, how we do stuff. We create big strategic plans and big reports and all this kind of stuff. At the end of it, you wonder, did we get more touchdowns? And do you know? Do you know? So if we get this, I want to give you just two examples of two agencies that are awesome. And you're going to hear about Fleet today in one of the breakout sessions. Understanding the difference between results and strategy is so big. So Fleet has a few goals, increase utilization, reduce maintenance costs, and improve air quality. Well, let's talk about improve air quality. That is awesome, but what does that mean? So prior to getting clarity on the goal unit, there was a lot of strategy moving forward. Do we buy more CNG cars? If so, how much? Do we might buy more hybrid cars? If so, much? What percentage of the fleet should be from these cars? But they got really clear on their goal unit, which was the amount of emissions going out from a car for every mile traveled, really, in the fleet. How many pollutants are we emitting? For every mile traveled in fleet, how many pollutants are we actually emitting? That became really clear. Like there was a number now. And they could tell if they introduced something or took something out of fleet, how was that impacting that number? And what they found when they got clear about the goal unit, that CNG and hybrid may be important, but some of the bigger problems we had were old cars that were polluting a lot. We needed to just pull those out of the fleet. It was a low-cost initiative that made a huge difference. But it's because the goal unit informed the strategy, not the other way around. We've seen this too with Workforce Services, and I was meeting with them a couple weeks ago, and it's their goal to improve their lives for refugees. It was great to see the clarity in their goal unit to move people from $9 an hour to $15. Pretty clear. Are we making progress or not? Now, that's not enough to define a goal unit, but it's the start. We have to first believe that we can distinguish between our activities and if we have a yardstick to make sure we're actually making a difference. So if we assume that, third prerequisite, is how do we define our goal unit? Right? How do we make that happen? Well, in our office, our mantra is we have more value for every taxpayer dollar invested. We actually have a way to measure that. And we feel like to know that, we have to answer three basic questions. Some of you guys have heard this, because if you're in our working with us, you've already helped develop these measures. But three questions. What do we do, right? How well do we do it? And what does it cost us to do it? Now, sometimes that cost part in government's missing a lot. I was looking at a lot of federal reports just for fun one night, and most of those federal reports may have some interesting outcome data. I didn't see one that connected it to cost. Not one. Do we know what the cost is for delivering the service? So I think that these three measures are really important. It doesn't mean that we still don't look at those operational measures day to day, but these are our yardstick measures to know long-term, over time, are we trending up or down in our overall performance. So it sounds like too simple, right? Like you just need to know those three things. Well, one of the tenets of the theory of constraints world is a pillar of simplicity. The actually simple answers are the better answers. Have any of you guys heard of Occam's razor? Don't raise your hand. Just say yes. Yes. Right? It's basically the approach that the simplest answer is normally the best or more accurate one. There's actually some really interesting empirical data that actually says that that's true. Too much complexity can confuse us. We get bad signals. Rami was talking last night. We kind of get white noise when we've got too much data. They can start to conflict with each other. We want simple measures that can tell the real story of what's happening. We want to see the forest through the trees before we start cutting paths. There's a great quote from Mark Twain, and he said, I'm sorry I wrote you a 5-page letter. I didn't have time to write you a 1-page letter. Right? Simpler is harder. It's sometimes easy to throw out lots of data because it feels like we're doing a lot, but sometimes it masks, the complexity can mask what's really happening. And simplicity is the other side of really hard work and good thinking. And that's where we try to land with our measures, at least our strategic measures. So what do we mean by this? How do we define this? You guys have heard us use this term, quality throughput over operating expense, QT over OE. If you've heard that, please clap. Yes, you all know. Thank you. Okay, so we all know. Let me just define it for those who may not, and we can reinforce. It's important as a culture that we all understand what we're talking about. Quality is simply how well do we do something? How accurate are we? How reliable are we? How well are our programs affecting people's lives? Are we helping, vulnerable populations succeed or not, right? The T is throughput. How much can we do in a period of time? A lot of times we'll call it completed work. That work completed is important. How many people do we serve? How many things do we produce in a period of time? You'll see a lot of your speed as you get faster shows up in your throughput. And then your cost. What's my cost for doing business? We want to know just not these three things, but we also want to understand their relationship. A guy who is in the TOC world, who I just think is brilliant, he ran one of these companies called Realization. It's a critical chain project management software company. Real smart. He just retired, and he said when he retired, he said this one thing: if people can understand their quality throughput, in TOC it's just throughput, but in government we say quality throughput, it is one of the biggest leverage points they'll have. Because if we can get that clear, that will help us align our operations, our resources, our time and attention to a singular goal. He said it's one of the biggest leverage points an organization can have. That sounds too easy, but I think it's really true. So we want to understand that. The other thing about this measure, we want to understand the relationship between these three things. We call it a checks and balance measure. There should be a balloon up here that shows, we don't want one side. Have you ever, right, is there a balloon up here? And you squeeze one side and the other side pops out. So we want to improve our quality, so we invest all this money and all of a sudden our systems become too expensive. Or we cut our costs and then all of a sudden we see our quality and our ability to meet demand go down. It's a checks and balance measure, a composite measure, so we can really make sure nothing's out of whack. The other thing I like about this measure, and that makes sure that harmony across the system exists. We all clear what we're trying to accomplish. If you're a football team, you can track the individual stats of each player, but you want to make sure the whole team ultimately is winning. This is the team measure. If everything we're doing across the board, across alignment of our systems happening, we're going to get this QT over OE improved. So let me give you some examples of this. I hope I remember these. There's 4 of these examples. So I want to ask you guys, if I'm in a system and my quality's improved, my throughput's gone up, meaning I've got more people coming in, I've got more demand, but my costs have gone down. Is that system performing better or worse? Better, right? I'm getting more value for my investment. Next scenario, my throughput's gone down. That is how many people, my demand for service has gone down. We're not talking point in time, right? We're not crazy. We look at trends because we understand their seasonality. If my throughput's going down, but my costs have stayed the same and my quality stayed the same, am I better or worse? I'm worse, right? My cost for service has actually gone up. Next scenario, if, I don't remember this one, is it that my Q's gone up and my T and OE stayed the same? Yeah. So if that's true, am I better or worse? I'm better, right? My costs are the same, and I'm getting better quality. I'm providing more reliable services. I'm getting better outcomes for my clients. That's actually a great thing. And the 4th one is what? Yeah, I can't remember what it is, so just make it up and figure out. But you can tell the difference between the relationship between these elements. If we don't understand that, we're just going to put money to stuff and have no idea if it's making it. It goes into the black hole of government. It just disappears. We need to make sure our investments show up, that we can tell the taxpayer, hey, give me some money, and I'm going to put it over here in this program. Was it worth the investment or not? We need to be able to articulate that. Okay, so if we've done that, and I'll make this assertion, and you guys may agree with me or not. If you don't know this, I don't think you have clarity in what your program's doing or your service. Is that fair to say that? Is that rude? I don't mean to be rude. I'm just saying if we don't know that dynamic, we may not have perfect clarity into how our services are actually performing, especially the cost side. Okay, final thing. Let me just talk hidden capacity, and then we'll wrap up. We lived in Maryland for a while, and I ran the Department of Disabilities back then. And for me, those were the most important services out there, right? I mean, we were talking about long-term care. We were talking about waivers for people with disabilities, developmental disabilities, helping people get independent jobs. I mean, it was it. And we put our budget together, and that was the most important thing for me. And then I had an opportunity to run for lieutenant governor, and my eyes were opened. And the governor knows this better than anyone, and Justin. The governor's chief of staff, Justin, is here, by the way. So I went and had a meet with dairy farmers and folks who are concerned about the quality of the Chesapeake Bay, and meeting with correctional officers and folks at the Department of Health, and fears about the pandemic flu was the concern there. And my eyes were open that my issue was important, but it was not the only most important issue out there. And I started to understand that for every dollar I asked for, I was taking it from somebody else. We talk about this revenue demand thing. You've heard me maybe talk about it before. The demand for services, regardless, Utah has the best economy out there, but regardless of how good of our economy is, the demand for services will always exceed available revenue. It is just the fact of how the dynamic works. The only solution we have, if we want to meet all the services, is to find hidden capacity. So let me give you an example in government. There's almost 2,000 people on a waiting list for services for people with disabilities. It's estimated there could be 25,000 people that need it. There are 165 kids who are on very, very significant medically complex issues. There's probably 4,500 kids that need services. There's only now available for kids for 165 families. For the average cost of a state employee, we could serve 57 seniors Meals on Wheels for a year. We could serve 26 people in substance abuse and alcohol treatment for the cost of an average FTE. We could treat 83 acres from catastrophic wildfire prevention, to treat those acres so that we don't have damage to homes or recreational facilities for the cost of an employee that's about $100,000. And the list goes on in terms of the impact. When we ask for money for an FTE, for a service, or for a program, we have to understand there's an opportunity cost that somebody else is going without. So before we ask for that, as we get into this process of improvement, we have to first find our own hidden capacity and make sure we have done everything within our power to squeeze out what we have, because it impacts somebody else down the road. So what do we mean by hidden capacity? Well, here's an interesting chart. Is the life expectancy chart up? Yes? What's up? Up. So why am I showing you life expectancy? Interesting, in the 1900s, average life expectancy was 49 years. Today, it's about 78. According to the Social Security Administration, if you're a woman today and you turn 65, you'll actually live to age 86. A really interesting book I just read called Evolving Ourselves just said the life expectancy is increasing by 1 year every 10 years, and that's accelerating. I find this fascinating because there was a time in history when most people just live to age 35. We've more than doubled the life expectancy, and it's because scientists and doctors and the medical profession has found, and nutritionists and dietitians have found untapped capacity that we as human beings have to extend our life. I would assert this: if we can find this kind of hidden capacity in the life cycle and life expectancy, we can find it in our own systems. For sure. Now, we call it hidden for a reason because it's not just easy to find. Sometimes we go after the easy stuff. We reorganize, we automate, we ask for more money, we train people to death on systems that are ineffective. The hidden stuff means hidden for a reason. Sometimes it's the stuff we wouldn't normally look at. It may be counterintuitive. It's hard to see. It requires that we actually see how our systems are working, the flow of work. We uncover it, we lift up the trunk and get dirty and into the engine to figure it out. And it's hard. It's like a house. You can walk into a beautifully decorated house, but behind the walls, it's the plumbing and the electrical work and the foundation that really makes or break if that house is a good house to live in, and it's the stuff you don't see. But we've got to find it. We've got to look for it. And sometimes if we can't see it, we think, We've done all we can. I need more money. I'm so busy. I'm so stressed out. I need more money. We just have to make sure we look first and look a little deeper. The guy who ran the CEO of Yellow Pages, because you imagine when Yellow Pages, the business just transformed, right? Who was going to use a Yellow Page book, that old book for looking for phone numbers? He said something interesting. If we don't cannibalize ourselves, somebody else will. In government, we don't have always that pressure on us like the private sector, so we almost have to be really disciplined to put that on ourselves so that we can find that capacity. So let me just end with a couple of thoughts about how we find this, and you'll hear about it from the breakout sessions. One is understanding it applies to you, getting your quality measure set up. Those are just the diet things or the scale things. We got to get into the diet and exercise. But one thing that's so critical, and I know our keynote's going to speak about it a little bit more today, is this idea of focus. The theory of constraints world uses something called 5 focusing steps, and it is simple but profound, and the more I am around this work, the more I've come to appreciate that simplicity can be powerful, and focus is everything. There's waste and opportunities and variability everywhere. Would you agree? Yes. The question is, which one should we go after? Which ones are going to give us the biggest return? Where is our biggest constraint? So 5 focusing steps. Number 1, you guys have heard this. I'll go through them quickly, and you'll hear about them more. If you've been working with us, you've heard about them. If you haven't, you'll have fun learning about them. Identify your constraint. What's your biggest constraint? You want to maximize that first. Your constraint is the heartbeat of your entire organization. If it's not functioning well, nothing else is. Maximize that. Make sure that's working at its peak performance. Subordinate everything else to that constraint, meaning support it. Making sure the people before and after are aligned and helping it. Only after you've done those first 3 steps, only then do you add new money or investments. We call it elevate the constraint. And then finally, you check it again. This work's not done. You make sure it's happening. These 5 focusing steps, and if you read the goal, you're going to learn a lot about these principles, are just fundamental to finding hidden capacity. Last little point I'll make on this. There's a slide here. Is this the quote? There's a quote first, right? There's a quote. And the quote says this. It's by a guy named Professor Adcoff. And he said a quote, and I loved it. He said, analytical thinking is the opposite of systems thinking. Now, systems thinking, just let me take a break in the quote, is key to theory of constraints and what we're trying to do here. When the governor said we have 82 major systems, we have 82 major systems. Systems thinking is key. So he goes on to say, analytical thinking is the opposite of systemic thinking or systems thinking. Analytical thinking assumes that in order to understand the problems or performance within a system, you have to understand how the individual parts act separately. I may have not gotten that perfectly right, but close. He said, in contrast, though, systems thinking is the opposite of analytical thinking. Systems thinking assumes that in order to understand the problems or performance within a system, you have to understand how the parts interface, how they work together. We can't improve one part of the system without understanding it has downstream and upstream effects. We all work in systems. We want to understand the biggest leverage point, the impact they have on each other, and making sure everything's working in harmony. Let's see the cute little slide, the music one. Look how cute this is. See? I love that. We want our systems to work in harmony and to see how the whole system, all the individual parts, how they interact with each other and how they can get flow, continuous uninterrupted flow to give a good product to the customer. Final thing, ideas on this. In the capacity, you'll hear some today. Simpler is better. We can do simple things like reduce bad multitasking. You'll hear that. Finding full kit, making sure people have everything they need. Squeezing out. When we build projects, we put extra little buffers in each task. We want to squeeze those out and find new ways to manage our time. We want to make sure there's no batching, and we want to make, I could go on and on, and we could make sure that things are prioritized and triaged. We can make sure that when we can do parallel sequencing. There is a whole list of things out there. Simple, powerful ways to get more performance. And I thank all of those folks here today who are going to be presenting on the great work they've done to make measurable improvements. We have an outstanding workforce in Utah. All of you here today are part of that, leading it, contributing to it, and it's an honor to be part of it. So thank you very much.